Our reading today comes from the book of 1 Kings, chapter 8. And I know that you've already read this and you've studied it, but please, I'll read it to you anyway, so we can all hear it together. And Solomon said, "Lord, the God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven above or on earth below. You who keep your covenant of love with your servants, who continue wholeheartedly in your way. You have kept your promise to David, my father. You have promised, and you have fulfilled it. Now, God of Israel, keep the promises you made to us when you said, 'You shall never fail to have a successor to sit on the throne, if only your descendants are careful in all they do to walk with me faithfully.' And now, God, let your word that you promised come true." And then Solomon asked, "But will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heaven, cannot contain you. How much less this temple that I have built? Hear the cry and the prayer that your servant is praying in your presence this day. May your eyes be open toward this temple night and day, this place of which you said, 'My name shall be there,' so that you will hear the prayer your servant prays towards this place. Hear the supplication of your servant and of your people Israel when they pray toward this place. Hear us from everywhere you are, and when you hear, forgive." We've come a long way from the drama of David in these last few months. And we are now in the reign of David's son, Solomon, who is now king. And Solomon, you might be aware, is a significant figure in our religious history. Our Jewish siblings consider him to be one of the 48 prophets, and our Muslim siblings regard him as one of the major prophets. And Solomon reigned over a prosperous time in this tiny kingdom's history. So things must have been going really well, because they had at this time both the wealth and the lack of conflict that allowed Solomon to build a new palace and a temple. And remember, before this, the Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred object to the Israelites, had been kept in a tent. Now, I'm sure it was a very nice tent. It was a nice tent, but a tent nonetheless. And now the ark has received a new home inside a stone and timber temple gilded by bronze, gold, and ornate carvings. And Solomon dedicates the ark into the temple. That is what we just heard read. And also know that wherever the ark is the home of Yahweh, or God. In the world of the ancient Near East, of which the kingdom of Israel was a tiny participant, gods were generally seen as human-like, with superpowers, but they were residents of the land that worshipped them. And temples were seen as the home of the resident god. When things were going well for the region, it was because the god was at home and was well fed and was pleased. When things went poorly, it was because the god had left. God had vacated its home, and then the people were on their own in the chaos of life. And for much of their history, the ancient Israelites were not much different. It was believed that Yahweh, or God, lived inside the tent, sitting atop the cherubim of the ark and feasting on the offerings the people provided. But what we hear today from this character of Solomon is a question that merely by being asked forever changes the substance of the religion that we all have grown out of. But will God really dwell on earth? The heavens cannot contain you, how much less this temple I have built. And here the wise King Solomon lets Yahweh out of the temple. He breaks with the tradition of the region and of his own history and stops trying to contain God in a human-made building, And this is at the dedication of the temple that he just spent 15 years having made built. The temple now becomes a different kind of destination. It is no longer Yahweh's singular home, but rather a meeting place, a sacred place among many. God cannot be contained. God is too expansive to be defined, let alone kept in one place. God is anywhere and everywhere, and any attempts by people to contain God are merely attempts to shrink God to something that we think we can define, something we think we can understand, something we think we can control. God cannot be contained. And Solomon named this incredible and complicated truth. God cannot be contained in a dwelling made by people, whether it was the temple of Solomon in Jerusalem or the sanctuaries of our modern churches. God cannot be contained. This means that God can be found anywhere. And I've heard members of this community say it. Name this. I've heard you say that you encounter God while walking in the woods, or while being near a lake, while being in the presence of loved ones, or listening to certain music, or moving your body, or dancing, or participating in various art forms. God can be encountered anywhere. There is no specific place. So this means that God is not solely contained in some of the places that we name as sacred. And this includes this important to us sanctuary here at Plymouth. And this is important to hold gently. As we are finishing our second summer not able to gather together in this space. As we are approaching an autumn with so much uncertainty about what is possible after all. And as much as we miss the familiarity of this sanctuary, as much as we miss the feeling of it, I'm very aware of the lack of you, the feeling of it when you're here, and the sounds that it contains. As much as we miss all the people that we are here with, God does not live in this room. God is as present in the sanctuary as God is present in all places at all times. A commentator on the Book of Kings said, like the temple that Solomon built, the existence of a sanctuary is just a representation of the possibility of God's presence amid a community in worship. But God's freedom transcends any building made by human hands. The same possibility of God's presence is found under the tent at 9 a.m., in a field, in the woods, in our homes. God is present when we come together with the intention to encounter God. The presence of God is felt when we seek it, when we come together in a worshipful posture, when we are open to receiving. It doesn't mean that we abandon these places like this sanctuary, these intentional spaces of encounter, but rather we do not depend upon its availability to find God. In addition to the many sanctuaries in our world, we can rest in the knowledge that God cannot be contained. Like the air that sustains us all, God exists wherever there is life. So if God cannot be contained in only one room or building or sanctuary, if God cannot be contained at all, then what do? It means that we are free to seek God in untraditional spaces and untraditional times. Where can I catch a glimpse of the presence of God at the grocery store? Or while sitting in traffic? Or at a wedding? Or at a funeral? At a baseball game? School? office, restaurant, or in an intensive care unit of a hospital. If God is everywhere, if God cannot be contained, then we can prepare ourselves to catch glimpses of God's presence anywhere. But we have to look. We have to be open to see. We have to be ready for the encounter. We have to be willing to see past our own selves, past our own needs, past our own preconceptions in order to catch a glimpse of the presence of God in the many everywheres of our life. So the question that this brings up for me now is that if God cannot be contained in any dwelling or sanctuary or space, what does that mean for us as people? And what I mean is, if God is uncontainable in space, then God can also not be contained in any one person. God cannot only be found in me or in you or in the things we like. God cannot only be found in the people who seem to do everything right or have the right titles or seem to be happy all the time. People that look a certain way or act a certain way. God cannot be contained in only the people who have the attributes that we tend to say we prefer: skin color or gender or sexuality, nationality, ethnicity, ability, power, wealth, position, age. God cannot be contained in any of these definitions of human division. This uncontainable God is in every single person. If God is everywhere and in everyone, then God must also be found in every living thing. God cannot be contained. And that doesn't mean we have to like all the places that God is present. But we need to remember that God is as present in the places that we call blighted as in the places that we think of as shiny. God is as present in the under-invested places in our world as is in the over-invested. And if we find that we don't like the condition of God's dwelling, then we can work to change it. So what would it mean if we began to approach everywhere as if it contained God? If everywhere was as sacred as a temple or a sanctuary? How would this change our relationship with place? What if we lived as if God was fully present, not only in this sanctuary, but in your home, in your workplace, your school, in George Floyd Square, in North Minneapolis and South Minneapolis, in Afghanistan and Chicago? What would it mean if we looked at the dwelling of God as being on fire, as it is in California or the Boundary Waters? Or the dwelling of God as being flooded, as it is in Haiti? What if we look for glimpses of the presence of God in the places of war, in the places of deforestation, melting glaciers, and acidifying oceans? We work, we invest in this sanctuary to make sure it is well maintained. What could be possible if we uncontained God and saw God everywhere? How would we then start to treat everywhere? And the same goes for people. What would it mean if we began to approach everyone as if they contained God, and ourselves as if we contained God? How would this change our relationship with others and with yourself? What if you saw God not only in those that you liked and agreed with, because that's easy, but everyone? God is standing in line at the food shelf or our community meal this evening. God is also present in the person driving too slow in front of you or driving erratically. God is present in the halls of power, and God is present in the marches and demonstrations, even if you disagree with them. God is present in somebody sleeping on cardboard. What if we began to see that God was in the birds choking on plastic, plants succumbing to deforestation, and animals left without foods or home? We work to maintain our own selves. What could be possible if we uncontained God and saw God in every little thing? This could feel overwhelming at first. There's a lot of everywhere and there's a lot of everyone. But I hope that we would rather be overwhelmed by the presence of God than the work it takes to try to contain it. It could be difficult to do, and it's easy to forget about, but I hope we would rather catch some glimpses of the presence of God than none. The intention of this reminder is to be hopeful and life-giving, the very stuff of God. So I leave with you a piece of wisdom that is often attributed to Mayan origins, but maybe not. It's called in lak'ech, and it goes like this. You are my other me. If I do harm to you, I do harm to myself. If I love and respect you, I love and respect myself. If God cannot be contained in any one place or any one person, then you really are my other me, because God is found equally in both of us and in all places that we go. God cannot be contained because we do not get to reduce God to something we can control or that we can own. God doesn't belong to us. But we all do get to live with God in all places and with all living things. You are my other me. If I do harm to you, I do harm to myself. If I love and respect you, I love and respect myself. May we together make this so.